Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me from where you are? Can everyone hear me? I'd like to welcome you to our first in-person meeting of the new year and the second half of our 2021-2022 season. Thank you for coming. And again, our thanks as an organization to the Women's National Democratic Club for providing this handsome location and this really delicious meal. Those of us who've been around a while, we look back to the Channel 9 Inn fondly, but boy, this sure is a step up, upgrade in the world. And so I'd like to start with, do we have any new members here today? Do we have any new members? Please raise hand. Let us know who you are.
Sandy Kay.
Again, please.
Sandy Kay. I'm a member of WNBC.
Sandy Kay, who's also a member of Women's National Democratic Club. Sandy, welcome to our merry band. And yes, Carl's pointing to. Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. And Kim is also of counsel to the association, and we're very happy to have you handling those duties, which we hope are light and infrequent. Carolyn, do we have any other new members who are not here today? Could you tell us a little about them?
Yes, since January, our December meeting, Colbert King.
Yay!
Anna Pierce, who is the former president. Yes. George Farr, who is our vice president's father-in-law. Valerie Grant, Helen Gleason White, Tim Hannaful, who is one of my former classmates from formerly Wilson High School, which is now the Jackson Reed High School. The city council voted this week to change the name. And Tim Hannaful was he was the catalyst for that. Joseph Spilsbury, whose mother is a member, he's joined, and Kim.
Bill Rice?
Yes, no, I'm trying to get the
Oh.
attention.
I thought he had some earth-shaking revelation for us. Bill usually does. Well, welcome to our new members, both here and soon to be here, we hope, for future meetings. I'm fairly pleased that we don't have any of the other sort of milestones to announce, unless someone proves me wrong. I don't think we've lost any members since the last meeting. Does anyone? So let's rejoice in our good fortune and the longevity of our members. So next, I'd like to entertain. Well, first of all, let's. Does anyone have copies of the minutes that they'd like to go over with a fine-tooth comb? Not hearing any such offers, I will entertain a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes and approve them as published. May I have a motion, please? It's moved. Seconded. All in favor? Aye. So moved. Now, next, I'd like to ask for our treasurer's report for the intervening period. Carolyn?
There's not much to report, given that we haven't had a meeting since Luncheon in December, but we're getting all the membership renewals in, and we're a little over a third. So if you haven't renewed, please send yours in. And thank you to those who have renewed and have sent in extra money as donations toward our program.
And can you give us just a brief running tally about people who've been generous and making extra donations to the funds? just totals at this point. Yeah.
Okay, as of March 11th, member donations have amounted to 8,065.
So many, many, many thanks to the members who were generous to give over and above our dues, our annual dues. This money is used for the purposes of the association. Yes, I see a hand in the back.
How many members?
Carolyn, can you give us that figure?
We have 345 members, which includes honorary members of the DC Council, who don't pay dues or members. We have 185 renewals so far.
So if you know friends who haven't renewed, remind them. And if you know people who you think would be interested in joining, which I think everybody should be interested in joining.
Did you say the donations are $8,000?
Yes, that includes, can I mention some of the higher? We've had donations from $5, we've had donations from $5 to $100 to $200, and the DAR of DC donated $1,000 to go toward the 16th Street Memorial Project, and the Kiplinger family donated $2,000. That was the largest.
Thank you. And which,
$8,000 is an all-time record. I know we hit 5,000 as a rule, and I think maybe the first year we started taking donations, it was 6, but never 8.
Oh.
The entire year, that's phenomenal.
so thank you to everybody, and especially thank you to the daughters. They always come through. I remember when we did our AOI Armistice Day Centennial Memorial on November 11th, 2018, that the daughters were there, and they presented beautiful floral tributes, and they presented a physical presence. So thank you, ladies, if you're here today or not. I'd like to welcome our people who are maybe watching us in the virtual meeting. Do we have any tally on that? Is Carolyn, Cindy, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. We have about 20 people joining us today on Zoom.
20 people. Okay, well, we're very happy to have them. We would even be happier if they were here because it's a cold and chilly day, but it's beautiful, bright and warm here, and we're having a delicious meal. So, you know, as things progress and as we work our way back into the new normal, whatever that eventually turns out to be, please consider coming and joining us. This is, if you do Metro, it's Metro accessible. If you drive, we have parking across the street, which we have instructions on that. So I think it's always fun to have people here in person. It adds to the crowd. All right, now, just a few notes today. Today is St. Patrick's Day. And there are two St. Patrick's churches in Washington, D.C. One is St. Patrick's Episcopal, which has a large and thriving school, and it's on Whitehaven Parkway, I believe. And no, W Street? I think it's Whitehaven. And there's also St. Patrick's downtown. As I will say, it's on 10th Street, right across from Woody's, Woodward and Lothrop. And that is the oldest Roman Catholic congregation in Washington, in the city of Washington, the old city, the l'enfant city. It was established in 1794, and it was established to serve the stonemasons and day laborers and hod carriers, Irish mostly, who helped build the White House and the Capitol. So that's how that came into existence. The current church, which is still on 10th Street, rather handsome Gothic complex, Gothic revival complex, dates 1884 and beyond. And I haven't been able, on short notice, to identify the architect. Our architect member of the board of directors, John Edwards, may be able to find out at some point. It's got, yeah. I don't expect you to have it at the tip of your tongue. And St. Patrick's downtown is also famous. It is the home of the Blue Mass for the members of the Metropolitan Police Department every year. So something to think about. So having made note of that, I also think it's probably time to turn over the microphone for a moment to Nelson Ryman-Snyder, our historian. Nelson, do you have some choice tidbits for us today?
I do indeed.
Come on down.
As you all know, there's been a lot of Strom and Drang recently about statues in Washington and other cities of Civil War, Union, or Confederate soldiers, and men in Congress and so on who were slave owners, and their statues are under attack. Many of them have been removed. Well, at one time, the Irish were under attack in Washington, and very controversial. And it involved a statue that now stands at 24th and Massachusetts Avenue. And it's a statue of the Irish revolutionary leader who tried to drive the British from Ireland in 1803 and was hanged for occupying Dublin Castle and taking the viceroy hostage. Can you name this revolutionary person?
Two hands.
Okay, well, you'll have to split it up. I don't know. Maybe one of you can get the next one. Go ahead.
In Sunday's Washington Post, in the comic section, did anybody see that? That has the historical stories of Washington, D.C. It had that account of your flashback. Yeah, thank you. And it mentioned Emmett in that. So that was a refresher. That's how I happen to know.
I have a few copies of that if anyone would like to see one. It was very well done. I just might add a couple of facts. As I say, he was hanged in 1803. He was only 25 years old of age at the time he was hanged. Now, in 1917, a group of Americans of Irish descent commissioned a statue of Robert Emmet. And they tried to find a place for it in Washington, a place for it. Well, the State Department and other people came out. This is 1917. There was a war going on in Europe, remember. And there was this conflict of the British and the Irish were still going on. The Germans were playing on that. And the State Department said this would be a bad time. We want to defend the British. No, we're not going to approve you finding a site in Washington for the statue. So they didn't know what to do with the statue. And so they thought, well, is there a cultural institution in Washington that will put it on display, maybe in one of their museums? So they did approach various institutions, and one accepted the statue of Robert Emmet to put on display in one of its museums. Can you name the organization, the cultural organization that accepted the statue at this time, 1917, of Robert Emmet? It's located on the mall. Uh-oh.
Freer Gallery?
You got it. The Smithsonian accepted. To this day, it has title to the statue. To this day.
Nelson, tell us where it is now, where it's located, the statue.
27th, and I did it in the beginning, 27th and Massachusetts Avenue. About 2 blocks, I understand, from the Irish Embassy. Now, it was on display for many years. The Smithsonian had it on display for 20 years in the main hall of the Museum of Natural History. Now, another war was brewing, 1940, 41. And mysteriously, I tried, one of my research came from James Good, a former member of the AOI, who, as you know, worked for many years for the Smithsonian. So many of these stories I'm telling are directly from him, from research he's done, and from research he wasn't able to verify in some cases. So it was on display for many years in the Natural History Museum. In early 1941, it mysteriously disappeared. There was no announcement from the Smithsonian. Why? What had happened? Finally, the newspaper, it was revealed, oh, well, we've put it in storage. We thought it was more appropriate, it's a Natural History Museum, to put an animal, and we put the elephant in there. And it's, of course, and with no explanation, no public explanation of where it was, they said, well, it's in storage, and stay tuned for further. Well, 20 years went by. It was forgotten. And then we had an Irish president, a president of Irish ancestry elected, Kennedy. And all of a sudden, these different groups, heritage groups, Irish Heritage, Scottish, well, where is the statue of Emmett? Now's the time to get it placed in Washington somewhere. And so they came up with a nice site. And they thought, oh, this is perfect. And the State Department protested. Now, another war, as I say, was going on. It's 1941. Where do you think they wanted to put this statue? Near an embassy, within view of an embassy of a country. But the State Department protested vigorously. What country were they planning to place this statue near of Emmett? That would have gotten, that the State Department would have protested. Again, a war's going on. The Irish, the Germans were appealing to the Irish. All of that going on, you know, trying to have dissension among the Allies. And what embassy do you think would have protested? The British embassy, yes. Oh, no. Uh-oh, nobody got that one? Oh, no.
I heard somebody over here.
Somebody had it? Okay, well, you've won. I don't want to carry this one home.
Who is that behind the pillar? I can't see who it is. Who answered the last one?
Excuse me, hang on. Rich,
Okay.
your last name. Oh, West.
So that was the preferred site at that time of it. And as I say, they didn't get it there. It finally wound up at 24th and Massachusetts Avenue. But it took how many years? 1917 it was commissioned. It didn't wind up in a place in view on the streets of Washington until 1966 it was dedicated. Unfortunately, Kennedy wasn't around to attend. Just a couple of things I add in that I was surprised to read that Emmett, in his speech before the court, when he was sentenced, mentioned that George Washington was his major inspiration for leading the independence movement in Ireland, which surprised me. I thought he might have mentioned somebody else, but apparently he was right on with. There is a replicate of the statue in a park in San Francisco. I don't know if any of you have been to San Francisco and seen it. You might look it up if you're there. Now, let's get to the White House. The White House was designed by an Irish-born architect. You know who that was? James Hoban. Very good, very good. And it was based on a site in Dublin. Does anybody know what the site in Dublin was? Anybody been to Dublin and maybe you've seen it? Pardon? Yes, very good. Well, you've won twice. That's awful. And really, the White House is I just thought of it in talking one time with James Good. He said, you know, the White House is really a Irish-American landmark. And it really is. We don't think of it that way, maybe, but it is. And so that's my day with the. I might also mention that, and if any of you tried the new Senate beer put out, there's my prizes. They have Senate beer put out by it was the original Heyrich Brewery beer. It's now available, and it's very good. And a percentage of the sales go to the preservation fund of the Heyrich House. And Bill Rice can tell you where to buy it. He's right here. It's not available in the big chain stores yet, but it is available in many places, and I recommend it. It's very good to try it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson.
Can I, we just learned that if you go on a tour of the Heyrich House, which has been renewed, at the end you will get beer, Heyrich beer.
Okay.
Terrific.
Hi, actually, you can get it in big chain stores now. So if you want to go, you can get it a 6-pack at your local grocery store.
I'd just like to have it noted in our minutes for history that on the way here today, I and probably a lot of people passed embassies and other institutions, and they were all flying the Ukrainian flag below the flag of their country and ours. But I saw Ukrainian flags all up and down Mass Avenue on my way here.
Thank you, and thank you for drawing that to our attention. I think that we're all focused to a certain extent on the tragedy of events in Ukraine, and we all in our thoughts and in our prayers of the Ukrainian people, and we wish for the best. We wish for a speedy and peaceful solution to this conflict. But thank you for bringing that up. It's important to bear witness under these circumstances.
I would just like to add something that I would like to say that regarding the comment that the White House is an Irish-American landmark, and you cited the St. Patrick's Church where many of the laborers would go to worship. Well, I just want to make the point that you could also say that the White House is an African-American landmark, and the U.S. Capitol is an African-American landmark, because hundreds of enslaved Americans did the bulk of the work on those of the first and second federal buildings that were constructed, and it was a good deal for the government because they were getting enslaved laborers from the landowners in neighboring Virginia and Maryland. But I think it's important that we keep in mind the labor and the contributions of African Americans to the history and culture of our country.
Continuing on that, I've always wondered why there has been a movement to have a Benjamin Banneker statue in the city.
Amen.
There's a Benjamin Banneker fountain.
Fountain, yes, there will.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'd like to move on to,
Bill, can I make one more? When you
Okay.
asked if there was an in memoriam, Jim Embry passed away in January.
oh, of course, right. So sorry, yes. So sorry to hear that. Jim Embry, longtime member, friend of many of us, was gathered to his reward in January.
And he was the AOI sort of liaison from the DC
Liaison
Fire
for the District Volunteer Firefighters Association. And Bill Brown keeps a sad thing to say, but a fairly accurate on our website in memoriam tally, including biographies where they're available, of our departed members. So let's now move on to the main event. I'm very pleased to have today Rich Reyes-Gavilan, Executive Director of the District of Columbia Public Libraries, as our guest. I've known Rich for a long time, and his family for a long time as well. He has a Bachelor of Arts in English from the University of Albany in Albany, New York, and Master's in Library and Information Sciences from the University of Texas at Austin. Now, he was born and raised in Queens, so it stands to reason that when he finished his studies, the academic part of your studies, because life is an ongoing study, he was appointed to a position at the New York Public Library, where he rose to be the director of the humanities collections, which was the part that is not in the big building, but which is the more open to the public, as I recall, in New York City. And in 2008, he was appointed director and later chief librarian of the Brooklyn Public Library. And if you ever have a spare afternoon when you're in New York and you want to see one of the great, magnificent library structures in our country, I suggest you see the Brooklyn Public Library, which was built, I believe, in the 20s or 30s. It's really a magnificent building, and Rich worked on renovating that at that time and had many public programs that he instituted there. So in 2014, he came to us in Washington as the executive director of the District of Columbia Public Libraries. Some of his initiatives are Know Your Libraries. It's the first strategic plan in many years for the District of Columbia Public Libraries, and stressed a commitment to customizing collections and services in our more than 20 branch libraries to serve a diverse community, which I think is a great idea. Now, of course, most importantly, he has directed the reconstruction and renovation of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, the jewel in the crown of the D.C. public library system, the only building in Washington, D.C., designed by the great mid-century architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. I think I'm getting that reasonably correct. And which was completed just recently. And the building was, in 2021, given the Richard Driehaus Award for historic preservation, the best historic preservation project in the country. And this is Rich, with his colleagues, guided the renovation expansion. At that time, it was the largest public construction project in Washington, D.C. At the same time, we did not neglect the branches. I'm sure all of us who live in Washington, D.C. have been impressed with the reconstruction or renovation of more than 20 branches. Particularly the Cleveland Park branch on Connecticut Avenue was completely rebuilt, as was, I believe, Tenleytown, if I'm not mistaken, pretty largely. And the West End Library branch, which has won an award. I believe both Cleveland Park and the West End branches have won awards for the work that was done there. And Rich has initiated the Books from Birth program to help young people learn to read from early childhood on, and the Go Digital campaign that brings digital resources and web-based learning to underserved parts of the community. And they've recently been working on the Next Libris, which is a new project for physical expansion of the system, and also plans for the equitable distribution of library facilities throughout the city. So, and he's now been with us almost 8 years, and we're happy to have him. Rich and his wife Liz, who is with us today, and their 2 daughters live in Mount Pleasant. And I'm very pleased to introduce my friend Rich Reyes-Gavilan.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I should say before we start, this is a pretty sort of visually intensive talk. So if you all in the back can't see the screen very well, I do invite you to just maybe grab a chair and move on up. It'll be a lot more fun than just listening to me talk. So thanks, Tom, and I'll just say, Tom, I've known Tom since Liz and I got married, probably since before then, so almost 20 years now. And I'm so glad that my sister-in-law, Amy Argetsinger, is here. I'll plug, I'm reading Amy finally. Amy just wrote a book on the history of Miss America. It's called There She Was, and if you haven't read it, you should read it. I'm really enjoying it. I'm on like page 70 or so. We've got 20 copies at the DC Public Library. I made sure that we bought a lot. But I'd prefer it if you bought a copy, because that way my kids get better Christmas presents later this year. So thanks, Amy, for joining us. Tom, thanks for inviting me. Some of you may know that Tom and I were working this conversation out about 2 years ago, planning for a March 2020 presentation on the Martin Luther King Library that had yet to open. And fast forward 2 years, and now we're doing almost the same conversation, despite the fact that the library has been open now for a little bit of time. I title this presentation, Remembering the Past and Working for an Even Better Future. Do you know what that line is from? Do you know where that phrase is from? It's the tagline to AOI. I was messing, in fact, I don't know, Cindy, if you're there, I actually had a slide before this. You probably thought it was there in error. See, there it is. So that's your website, and you've got a tagline under there. You can't see it. I can hardly see it. But it says, again, remembering the... Anyway, I thought it was a great tagline for our conversation, because that's really what we tried to do over the course of 3 years during the design phase of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. And I will recognize a couple of people here who are just, I didn't think I'd run into them. Well, Bill Rice I run into everywhere. Bill Rice is a big advocate for the library's special collections, the Washingtoniana collection of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, greatly expanded space, and I invite you all to attend programs there, or just be in the space. And Robin Diener, who is the president of the Friends of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. Robin was on the advisory panel that helped us so much in terms of our thinking about the beautiful MLK project. But let me go back to the beginning now, and you can, Cindy, one slide in, and you can go into the next slide now. So when I accepted the job back in 2013, I had actually never visited the MLK Library, but I did know it for its association to these two giants of the 20th century, one in civil rights, Martin Luther King Jr., and of course, Mies van der Rohe, one of the maybe three most important architects of the 20th century. And so the excitement about being able to work on a project that was associated with these two just giant figures was really exciting, and it was certainly enough to get Liz and I excited about moving down to DC. But next slide, please. The excitement sort of quickly faded once I actually visited the building, discovering this really just unimaginably dull space, dingy, dark. Our project architects, not yet, Cindy, thanks. Our project architects, on day one, they're like, all the books are getting the natural light, and people are being forced to read by the awful fluorescent lighting, and that, I think kind of underscores the thinking around the space. It was just a hodgepodge of bad idea after bad idea. And next slide now, please. The public stairs, you would not believe these are public stairs. And I should also recognize Bill Turner, former employee of the DC Public Library for so many years. You shouldn't give him any prizes because he's a librarian. We all know these things. I didn't want to say anything, but I knew all the answers myself. But the public stairs, right? They're so important to the legibility of any public building or a library. If you've been to like the new Cleveland Park Library, you see how much time we spend on making the building accessible and making it just interesting. Like, what's going on upstairs? How do I get up there? Let's see what's happening. But this is what you were greeted with when you were coming to the Central Library at the nation's capital. It's just, not only was it dark and dangerous, but they were also hard to find. The public stairs were in the back of the building. We had public services in the front or the back. I mean, it was just a real uninformed collection of different services with no thinking to the overall experience coming in. Next slide. Another example of just the horrible experience when you did find the stairs, or what you would encounter. One of the great architects that worked on this project, a man by the name of Tom Johnson. He was Martinez and Johnson. They were the architects of record. They were the lead historic preservation architects. Tom Johnson would describe this, and he died very sadly in 2017, very suddenly. But Tom would describe the MLK library. Well, he would talk about Mies van der Rohe doing, great one-story facilities, like at the, in Chicago at the IIT. He would have these great one-story buildings and the pavilion, and then he'd have the great skyscrapers, right? The Seagram building or the buildings in Chicago. He didn't really do too many buildings that were sort of in between those two things. So Tom actually described the MLK library as 4 one-story buildings, just sort of slapped on top of each other with no thread, no connectivity. And I mean, I think that was a really, really important way to describe it. And you'll see that we spent a lot of time working on the vertical circulation to improve access to the building. So next slide, please, Cindy. So after, and Robin could tell this story much better than I can, but after threats of selling the library back in the early 2000s and moving it to the city center, which was still in just a concept, this was, Mayor Tony Williams, who was just thinking out loud, like, is this an option for us? Mayor Williams, has been a great fan of the library system and loves the new building as it's been renovated. But he did pose this question about whether we should sell the MLK library. There was very little confidence that anything could be done to make that building usable for the next century of library users. But advocates, including Robin Diener, organized in support of landmarking the building, and it was landmarked in 2007. And that basically changed the narrative around the building. It was no longer, can we sell it? It was really, what can we do about making this building work? The Urban Land Institute in 2011 wrote a report about the MLK library. I won't read all of it, but they call it an important landmark that has been neglected for many, many years. And basically, we've got to do something to make this thing, it's a 400,000 plus square foot building. There's a lot that we need to do to make this building usable. Fast forward, next slide, to early 2014. Some funding was already in place, thanks to former Mayor not Tony Williams, but Vince Gray. In early 2014, and this is where I come into the picture, the library conducted an international search for an architecture firm to lead the design on the project. And we selected an architecture firm from the Netherlands, Meccano. These are some of the Meccano projects that you might, some that you might recognize. On the right there in the middle, that is the library in Birmingham, England, that opened in 2013, a phenomenal space. And just actually on the lower quadrant, the third from the left, that is the Mid-Manhattan Library. Tom, you were referring to that. I used to work in that building, and they just did a $100 million phenomenal renovation of that library, and that's across the street from the what is now the Stephen A. Schwartzman building on 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. So Meccano was just known for their delightful projects, their whimsical projects, and we really thought that we needed that in this really sort of stern kind of linear Mies building. So we were happy to hire them. They submitted, next slide please. In their written submission for the project, they included this really kind of neat graphic that a lot of people took to. And the graphic sort of kind of describes the evolution of the public library from these sort of transactional, one-dimensional spaces where people go to just more or less get a book and leave, to spaces that are much more complicated in their mission, spaces that not only have books but also have technology. They've got spaces for people to gather and enjoy their time together, performances, things of that nature. You might even see in that graphic, they include a little playground slide, which I think a lot of people back in 2014 said, well, that might be taking it a little bit too far. But lo and behold, next slide, we actually do have a playground slide in the new MLK library that we've had to adjust because it was going a little too fast for a lot of people. But so we do have a kid slide in the new building, and for me, I think that represents the sort of the new thinking around public libraries. Of course, there are places for scholarship and there are places for reading, but there are also places for fun and for joy and for delight. Next slide. I'll go through some of this real quick, but community engagement was a really important component to this project. There's a real sense of ownership around public libraries generally, but there was an incredible sense of ownership around the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library for reasons that I'll get into throughout this presentation. So we put together, there was an online crowdsourcing page. We had dozens and dozens and dozens of community meetings like this where we would talk to people. We had focus groups over the course of an entire year. I'd never seen so much community engagement done around any project ever, and it was all really well worth it. In the middle there on the top, there's this icon there, a legacy of Mies and King. Next slide. If you haven't seen this, this is a great documentary that is now freely available on YouTube, and this is something that was funded by a Dutch cultural organization, provided the design architects Meccano with funding for this documentary. It's about an hour long, and it really goes into great detail the significance of the community engagement process. I'm sure, Robin, I think you're in there, I'm in there, lots of back and forth about what the building should be, what it should not be. But I strongly urge you to go when you have some time if you want to see a good movie. It's freely available on YouTube. It wasn't always, it's only been there now for maybe about a year, but it's really good if you want to find out more. Next slide. We had a great 18-member advisory panel. I mentioned that earlier. These were people, architects, downtown business stakeholders, Robin Diener, who served as a sounding board for all of our good and bad ideas. They took away the bad ideas, left only the good ones, and we were happy to work with them for the entire design process. Next slide. For this presentation, I put in some of the favorite quotations that I got during the meetings that I would host. And maybe my favorite is that the lower level is one of the most depressing spaces I've ever been to anywhere. It's not just one of the worst spaces in a library, but one of the worst spaces anywhere. And frankly, you could say that about just about any space in that entire building, save for perhaps the Great Hall. And so next slide. We'll start talking about how we made some improvements. We landed on these building program tenets, and I don't want to run out of time, but I do think it's important to read these real quick. One of which is balance the joy of reading with space for innovation. Another one showcasing the life of Martin Luther King Jr. A third one respecting the building's historic designation. And finally, creating a space that's bright, open, and welcoming to all. I think we got the respecting Mies's work. I think we did a great job there, and Tom mentioned that we did, very proud of the fact that we did win the Richard Driehaus Award for Historic Preservation, probably the most prestigious national award for historic preservation. And then, when we start talking about showcasing the life of Dr. King, that is something that we heard over and over and over again, that it was not sufficient to name a building after Dr. King, and this gentleman brought up naming and the issues around naming that have been so central not only in DC but all over the country. People wanted more. They wanted Dr. King's teaching sort of embodied in the program of the space, both architecturally but also in the library program, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. Next slide. This slide is really, really important. So before we get to the exciting pictures, I wanted to stress the importance of making the building legible and easy to understand. So, we had this approach where we wanted the western side of the building, which is adjacent to the First Congregational Church, we wanted that to be the more sort of, because that's the darker side of the building, it's sort of the more passive side of the building. And the building gets increasingly more active as you approach 9th Street. We also wanted to concentrate all the public activities along G Street with the more of the staff activities along G Place. And then finally, we wanted the building to get progressively quieter as you went upstairs, so that by the time you reach the 4th or 5th floor, it becomes almost like the sanctuary type space. And then the middle of the building, on every single floor, is something that is sort of community oriented, We have exhibitions, we've got a community services space that DC Government Services will be offered from. We've got something called the living room, which is going to be a co-working space that's still in development. So we've got lots of spaces in the central part of the building on every floor that is kind of like a bazaar or marketplace for different types of services. So that really helped guide us in terms of figuring out the puzzle pieces, where children's services going to go, where will the Center for Accessibility go, where will all the various, dozens and dozens of different programs go in the library building. Next slide. Spending a lot of time on the building entryway was really important. The building was never very inviting when you came in, and so opening that up was really important. I should say I don't spend much time in this presentation at all talking about the regulatory agencies that sort of oversaw this renovation, but because of DC city, state, federal status, not only did we have the local historic preservation review board and all the local, Board of Zoning Adjustment and all those things that we have to deal with, but the Commission of Fine Arts was also a major player here. And then finally, the National Capital Planning Commission was the sort of the Uber boss around what we could do and what we couldn't do. And so when we would talk, maybe next slide would be even better. When we talked about the importance of exposing a new staircase to the National Capital Planning Commission, they didn't want us to strip away any of the brick from G Street. But in a very long negotiation process, we were able to strip away a lot of that buff yellow brick that dominates the building. So this picture here, you're seeing one side of the main entrance. Those 4 glass panels there, that actually used to be brick. And that brick was just there to hide whatever was behind it. We were, again, fortunate enough to receive permission to remove a lot of the brick in order to basically invite people to come into the building and invite people to come inside. And we'll see the staircase in a little bit more focus in a second. Just next slide, please. I just wanted to remind people what we were facing in 2015 and for the 45 years prior to 2015. These stairs wouldn't cut it in a new library building, and so move to the next slide. These staircases we think do cut it. By the way, just show of hands, how many people have been into the new building since it's open? About half of you. Okay, well, the other half should come check it out. So the monumental stairs, they wind their way through all 6 floors. In fact, we've got 2 sets of these stairs. And it's really sort of the major design intervention in the new building. I like to say it's the wowest of all the wows in the new building. Really inviting people up to explore. Our lead architect from Meccano, Francine Uben, in her own inimitable way, would always talk about the journey of learning. And, Rich, we have to concentrate on the journey of learning, and these stairs are the journey of learning. And so she was right. It's a really just a remarkable, remarkable experience. These sort of haphazard trapezoids that are very, very different from the hard 90-degree angles of steel that represent most of the building that Mies originally designed. Next slide. This is the staircase looking up. You've got these 3 beautiful skylights. Each of the skylights is 5 feet in diameter. One of the things that you'll remember from the old MLK library, once you did find the stair, just the darkness, the incredible darkness was overwhelming. And now, even in rainy days like today, if you go over to the MLK library, you don't need any sort of artificial lighting. These skylights just flood the spaces with beautiful light. Next slide. And this is maybe the last perspective that I'll give you. A lot of people come to the building just to hang out in the stairwells, which is great. We love the stairwells so much that when we rebranded the library institution a year ago, next slide, we actually used the staircase as the inspiration for the entire library system's new visual identity program. So that's DC Public Library. We also have a tagline called Find Your Story, and that's obviously a play on words. You can find your book, or also you can find what story you were on at the MLK Library. Next slide. Here's just some of our stationery. If anybody's interested in me writing them a letter, I can do that on very cool stationery. Next slide, please. Quickly, just in terms of the upper floors of the building, and I should say the entire building, as I mentioned before, was landmarked in 2007. That included the first floor, the interior of the first floor. But the second through fourth floor were not landmarked, so we had much more flexibility with what we could do in the space. One of the biggest problems, or the biggest problem on floors 2, 3, and 4, and if you look in the lower left, you'll see that dotted line. Those dotted lines represent brick, luckily non-structural brick. And that was brick that you'll see on the right. Whenever you would get off a staircase or an elevator, you were just greeted by brick on both sides. Impossible to know where you were. Left was right, up was down. You no longer knew where you were, thanks to just this impenetrable brick everywhere you looked. But again, we were able to remove all of that brick to create just phenomenal sight lines into the various reading rooms. So you could see clear from 9th Street to almost 10th Street, from G Place to G Street. And next slide, the actual rendering or images don't do this justice. We need to get better pictures. But what you see now, actually where you see the flooring, you'll see where there's a change in color. Am I being shushed? I'm taken off the stage while we cut to commercial. Where's Billy Crystal? So the change in color on the floor, that actually represents where the yellow brick was. And we were asked to put in something, a nod to the brick by one of the regulatory bodies, just as a reminder of even some of the faults of the original building. So that's something that you can see where that brick sort of went around. But okay, so let's go on to some better pictures, and let's move into some of the other really important wow elements. One of the things, and I think Robin, you talked about this, Mayor Tony Williams, maybe in my first or second month in DC, we had breakfast together, and he's like, I don't know, he's like, I'm a book guy. He's like, can you figure out how to put a reading room, a real reading room in the MLK library? And, I was already pretty well familiar with it. And, it's tough. It's an office building, right? I mean, the MLK library was really an office building. But we took it back. We explored the idea with the advisory committee, and architects landed on, why don't we cut a hole between 2 floors to create a double height space? And so between the 3rd and, I guess, 5th floor now, we cut out this 2,000 square foot void to create the semblance of a reading room that you might find in an old Carnegie building. And if you've not been there, you should come check it out. The furniture is all built to spec. We've renovated these beautiful fiberglass Eames bucket chairs. These were chairs that were in storage for decades, but were original to the building. So comfortable, and they just look great in the space right now. The artwork that now hangs over the space, and maybe next slide, please. The artwork is done by a woman named Zenobia Bailey. We had an art competition back in maybe 2016 for someone to come in and think about what we can do to create a really dramatic scene for the people who are sitting below. And we love Zenobia. She's a woman who's sort of labels herself like an Afrofuturist. We talked about hoping that our artists could be inspired by Dr. King, but not necessarily in such a heavy-handed way that it's another image of Dr. King speaking on the Mall or something like that. So she created this sort of dream sequence. I forget the name of it. It's quite long. And we're just really excited about it. Next slide. Just another angle. She designed this. It's some kind of fabric, and then the mobiles. I believe there are about 13 of them. These large metal sculptures, and she hand weaves these metal, these almost what do you call them? Wind catchers or dream catchers? Yeah. So, and there's the I have a dream, right? So without saying I have a dream, it's like, well, let's make these dream catchers, and you have to use your imagination a little bit. But it's a great space to come in and study, and I'm so happy that people are finally coming back in and they're setting up their laptops. This picture is taken from our new special collections. If I don't say that, Bill Rice will get mad at me. A phenomenal new space that that researchers are coming into more and more. Next slide. For those of you who want to see more of Zenobia Bailey's work, this beautiful mural greets residents at the new entrance to the Hudson Yard subway station in New York City. So this is just another example of her work, and you'll see similarities between this work and the ceiling at the new MLK. Okay, next slide. I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the ancillary pieces of the MLK library. You know, we knew that with 400,000 plus square feet, we wanted to do things other than just maybe some computers and some books. So we've got this great conference center. I don't have great pictures of it, but I think by showing you this floor plan, I wanted to just point out that we've got, you know, spaces for the public, for groups like this, frankly, to come in and use the space, whether you are catering it or not. There's a terrific conference center and rooms. This is on the 4th floor. So before, people would have to meet on the lower level with no windows and really dark, low ceilings. These are all above ground, so lots of daylight, great places for groups to meet and mingle. Next slide. We have a phenomenal new exhibition program up on the 4th floor. The exhibition program is in service to the library's special collections. So one half of the wing on the 4th floor is devoted to Martin Luther King, but not as a national figure, but as a local figure. So it's an exhibition that explores those individuals like Nannie Helen Burroughs, who were friendly with Dr. King's family and inspired Dr. King, and then again, all the local activists from the 60s and 70s who were inspired by Dr. King. Many of you know Dr. King was very involved in issues around home rule and things of that nature, and we explore a lot of that in this exhibition. We did not, you know, we're not the King Center in Atlanta. We really wanted to talk about, we wanted to bring Dr. King down to a sort of a local level, and I think we've done a really good job at that. So the left-hand side of this screen is, actually that's me and Kojo Namdi, who you all know from WAMU. Kojo actually narrates a lot of the exhibition in one of the galleries. And the right-hand side is just maybe a slightly wider view of the gallery itself. Next slide. I'm going to pause for a moment and just talk a little bit about the fact that this building opened in 1972. And when we were going through the renovation process, when we were going through the community engagement process, there was this thread over and over and over again about honoring Dr. King, you know, don't forget about us. And it was a sentiment that the city is changing. This building represents the first memorial to a Black American in a city that is consumed with memorials to people who once enslaved others. And so there was that real sense of ownership. Don't you dare do anything to make this something that might invite gentrification or things of that nature. And so, you know, I like this slide. We got this from the DC Policy Institute. 1970, when this building was originally in design, you had a Black population in DC of, I can't even see my own slides. It was 71%. And then in 2015, when we were doing all of our community outreach around the project, it was down to about 48%. So you can, just a sense that, you know, we're losing something in the city, and this is an opportunity with the MLK Library to say that, you know, we're not going to lose this. And that's something that we really took to heart throughout the programming phase of the project. Okay, next slide. Just a couple of quick slides of you know, some of the things that we've got going on in the exhibition space. A lot of the exhibitions really focus on DC as a city of protest, which is something that I think we're all very proud of. We don't, you know, we can't vote in Congress, but we can get mad. And, you know, DC has been getting mad for many, many years. And there's, you know, there's something important about being able to get mad. So you can really come check it out there. It's really well worth your time. Next slide. Just images with little text panels about the various people in DC who, for example, here's an image around the no taxation without representation, people who've been advancing home rule for years and years and years. We have been, you know, we're not an art museum, but we have been collecting art, and we are displaying other types of art. Next slide. These are not on view. They're not Basquiat's. These are large protest signs that were built during the George Floyd protests. These large pieces of, a lot of them are wood, were attached to the Chamber of Commerce building, and they were given to us. We inquired about what was being done with some of the artwork from the Black Lives Matter protests, and they are now in our possession, and we're working with the Library Foundation to figure out how to mount them in a way that can preserve them. So we're really, really happy about being able to preserve some new art. Next slide, please. In 2019, a wonderful organization, a wonderful couple, Susan and Dit Talley. I don't know if anybody knows the Talleys from Cleveland Park. They are, or Susan is, I would say, the lead around a group of loosely connected individuals called the Friends of Alma Thomas. Susan and I met each other maybe 4 years ago, and she talked about her dream of having Alma Thomas recognized in the city in a way that she was struggling to find a good partner. She couldn't find a great partner with DC Public Schools and some others. So I said the MLK Library would be a phenomenal place to display the art of Alma Thomas. Alma Thomas, as many of you know, was a public school teacher for most of her life. She was a middle school teacher, so it was very appropriate when we named our teen room at the MLK Library after Alma Thomas. Susan and Dit donated about 13 Alma Thomas pieces, 3 of which that we've got on display right now. This one, and next slide, please. 2 others. So when you swing by the MLK Library on the 2nd floor, you can look for the Alma Thomas paintings that we've got between the teen space and the children's room. Next slide. We're also working with museums around the region for ongoing art exhibitions. This piece right now that is on the staircase on the 3rd floor on the west side of the building, this is Lawrence Weiner, who some of you may know is this American conceptual artist who happened to die almost to the day that this was put into the building. His work is really text-based, kind of thoughtful text panels that are put in everywhere from train stations in Berlin to now the MLK Library. The Glenstone Partnership is one that will bring many of the great Glenstone pieces to the MLK Library, and we are working, of course, with the city's Commission of Arts and Humanities. We just signed an MOU to bring some of the great pieces in the city's public art collection. The Art Bank will be coming to the library. So the goal is to have you see something new in a serendipitous way, maybe, whenever you come visit the building. Next slide. No library, no public library is great without a great children's room. When I first brought our oldest daughter is 15 now. We moved here, she was 6. We brought her to the MLK Library, and it was just it's like, who wants to bring their child to the story time room was just, it's 4 brick walls. It was like the school to prison pipeline, like in a nutshell. That's what it was. It looked like prison. And the great staff of the library doing their very best to make the space look friendly and delightful. Just, there was no winning. So we spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about how to make a children's room in a Mies building. And I think we've done a great job with color, with art. We dropped some playful lighting to make the space a bit more intimate. I showed you the slide before. Next slide, please. This is a beautiful little sort of amphitheater space where we will be doing our storytime programs. I'm very happy to say that after 2 years, our indoor storytime programs resumes on April 4th. So we're really excited about that. Depending on the next variant, which we understand is on its way, but at least we're going to try. So we're thrilled to have a children's room that residents can be proud of, and I also love the fact that we see lots of homeschooling parents in there every day. It's really, really just beautiful and playful and whimsical. You can see the Jose Andres restaurant right across the street there, so you know where you are. You're on the corner of 9th and G. Next slide. This is something that's in development. We've had supply chain issues for this living room co-working space that we're going to have on the 3rd floor. Constantly trying to give people different ways of sitting, ways of working together. So in addition to many, many study rooms and meeting rooms that you can reserve with your library card, we've also got these sort of open air spaces where people can gather and talk and meet and just work however they want to. Next slide. We have a lot of innovation in the new library. I'm not going to go through all the things that have been built in. This is one of many studios that we've got on the lower level. This is a studio that we use for podcasting. We've got other sound studios. We've got something that we call the Memory Lab. This is a studio for personal digital archiving. So if you've got old photographs or videotapes or floppy disks, and you want help having this stuff converted into something that is cloud-based, you can bring that over to the library and we can train you how to do that. So there's a lot of innovation down on the lower level, what we call the creative labs. And it's allowed space, and that was by design. Remember the program approach that I talked about earlier, all the loud stuff down on the lower level, and the building gets quieter as you go up. People said during the renovation, all this fancy gadgets, we want a quiet space too. It's like, it's 400,000 square feet. We can accommodate everything in a building of this size. Next. Very proud, this actually just opened last week in terms of other sort of ancillary uses that we want in our library. A cafe, but we didn't want just a cafe, and we wanted something that again would respect the legacy of Dr. King. So we're working with DC Central Kitchen, and we just opened, next slide, a cafe called Marianne's. And if you all know about the DC Central Kitchen mission, the great folks who work in this space are also getting additional job training to advance their careers in hospitality. It's just a terrific bunch of people. DC Central Kitchen is a terrific organization. We were so thrilled that they were willing to partner with us on the cafe that just opened. Reasonably priced fare. You can come in, you get a sandwich, chips, and a soda for $9.50, I think. You can get a small cup of coffee for $1. So there are very, very low barriers to participation. We didn't want a, what's the space at the West End? The Australian coffee shop? Blue Stone, something like that. That's, you're spending $5 for a cup of coffee over there. Here, it's something, again, we wanted it to be barrier-free as much as possible. Next slide. There's also a beautiful little outdoor patio on the first floor, and this outdoor patio actually used to be a ramp. It used to be a ramp that would go from the library's garage out onto 9th Street. We closed the ramp, and now we've got only one ramp that goes in and out on the other side, and so we were able to reclaim that space to create this really nice outdoor seating space. Next slide. In addition to the monumental stairs, I think the other dramatic change to the building certainly was the addition of the 5th floor. So if you can see that thing hovering on top that's about to land on the building itself, that is the 5th floor of the building, set back far enough from the building that you can't see it from outside, which is an important mandate from the historic preservation folks, that you couldn't change couldn't dramatically change the outside of the building. But what the 5th floor allowed us to do was, first of all, to build a brand new auditorium. Next slide. So this auditorium, which we never had an auditorium in the old MLK library, by putting it up on the 5th floor, we were able to build it in a column-free space. Not a bad seat in the house. This is a 300-seat auditorium, just beautiful space. Prior to Omicron, we were already having great author talks and things of that nature. Maybe a week before we closed down, we had Colson Whitehead was in the space discussing his new book, and it's just, we cannot wait to begin populating this with programs again. Next slide. And adjacent to the auditorium is, we've just got a phenomenal outdoor reading space. It's large, it's generous, great views, just a great place to sit down and just forget about everything, bring a book. We do rent it out for private events, but for the most part, it is open all day long to the public. There's a local school, BASIS, which is a charter school for kids who do really well in school. Every day at lunchtime, tons of them now run over to the library and they go eat their lunch at the top, and it's just great to see kids in the building enjoying the reading garden. Next slide. This was the old library, so all we had up on the roof was just some of the mechanical equipment that you see on the left, and then what we've got now is this. So it's really dramatic. And again, once you're there, you don't want to leave. I try to get up there as much as humanly possible, and it's just a great sort of accent for the building. And so I'm hoping that, once we learn to live with this pandemic in a meaningful way, we'll get up to 1 million visitors a year there. We're nowhere close, but the federal workforce coming back and others knowing more about the building, like you all do now, that will certainly happen. So with a few minutes left, I didn't have any idea how long I would be going on. I did want to just quickly pivot to some of our branch projects. Do I have like 5 more minutes? Great. Next slide. This is an old map of the original branch campus of the DC Public Library. I love this building. It's all our old Carnegies, some buildings that no longer exist, not really germane to our conversation. Next slide. Tom mentioned that we did publish, next slide please, a new facilities master plan that we call Next Libris, helping us think through how the physical campus of libraries will respond to changing behaviors, changing users. How do we address equity issues around the city? If you notice, and you begin to study the map of DC Public Libraries, you'll see on the eastern half of the city, we still have these co-located 6,000 square foot libraries, but you don't see any of those libraries on the western part of the city. We've got these 25,000 square foot spaces. You can do a little bit of research and figure out the legacy of why that is. So this Next Libris document attempts to correct the sort of historical inequity that exists even in our library system. And all credit to Mayor Bowser, who, upon having received this document a couple of years ago, in her subsequent capital budget, she put in tens of millions of dollars to replace all those small co-located libraries. So good for her. Next slide. These are all the projects that we've got coming up. I won't bore you with our Gantt charts. Next slide. But for those of you who are not super familiar with the branch campus, I just did want to just show you just as a little song and dance how the library system has changed. Most of our buildings back in the 50s and 60s look like this, these sort of simple brick structures, not a lot of light. This is the old Anacostia Library in Ward 8, and if you fast forward, next slide, we more or less transition from those types of structures to these types of structures. Next slide. And you'll see that we begin to embrace this idea of course you need books, but the books don't have to overwhelm the space, and especially in areas where we know that meeting rooms, and here you've got a family probably studying or something like that, you've got to figure out how to incorporate new uses into your buildings. Next slide. I always like to show this. This was the only public library visit anywhere that Barack Obama made in his 8 years in office, happened to be to the Anacostia Library. This was back in 2015. I was able to meet him, and after Dolly Parton, probably the most significant meeting of my entire life. Next slide. This is the old Francis Gregory Library in the Hillcrest neighborhood in Ward 7, beautiful neighborhood. Next slide here. David Adjaye, who you all know built or designed the African American and Culture Museum, designed this. He actually designed 2 of our libraries before getting the Smithsonian Commission. Gorgeous space. Next slide, and we're wrapping up here. This is a great interior of the Adjaye Library. Keep on going. One more. This is something that, one back, I'm sorry, Cindy. This is our newest library, and this opened last year in the middle of the pandemic. This is near the Southwest waterfront. So this is the Southwest Library. It is entirely glass and compressed timber. It is our first LEED Platinum library, so that is the best rating that you can get for environmental and design. Gorgeous space, just if you know where the duck pond is, you can walk up from the duck pond right to the library, only steps away from the waterfront metro. Great place to visit when you're going downtown to the wharf. Next slide. This new Lamond Riggs, this is not a great rendering. The new Lamond Riggs Library will be opening hopefully in about 2 months. This is up in the Fort Totten area of DC, so Ward 4. Next slide. The Southeast Library, you guys probably know, in Capitol Hill, right by the entrance to the Eastern Market Metro. This is something that is currently in design. It is a building that actually turns 100 this year. It's a 100-year-old building, and one of our busiest, but one of our smallest. Next slide. This is a super challenging project where we are actually building below grade to create a 19,000 square foot space and exposing, if you look at the very top of the building, we're creating a light well to get natural light down into the middle, and then over on the left, you'll see the berm sort of stops short of the building, and we're creating another light well to the space, because the last thing we want is to have below grade space that feels below grade. So we're hoping that we will have fixed a major problem that we're having, which is one of our busiest libraries in the city, also being one of our smallest. Next slide. I was going to read something from this great book by Eric Kleinenberg, Palaces for the People. It's actually a great book on this concept of social infrastructure, the idea that places like libraries are critical not just as spaces for learning, but as spaces that get people out of their homes and are just really profoundly important to the health of their communities. So if you haven't, take a look at that book. It says a lot about libraries and other public spaces. And I think that that's where I end. Next slide. Yes, that's where I end. So thank you.
I think we can have time for some questions, and Carolyn will bring around the mic.
In the interest of herstory, who is Mary Ann?
Who is Mary Ann?
Mary Ann.
Oh, Mary Ann, I believe, was the first. She was a DC Central Kitchen. I believe she may have even started the DC Central Kitchen. I actually don't know enough about it. Robin, do you know enough about Mary Ann? Yeah. Mary Ann's not of the library. She is a sort of a patron saint of the DC Central Kitchen folks. And so we are very happy to have them name the space for her.
You mentioned parking. Is there parking for the public underneath?
There isn't, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think we're all trying to get more people to, take public transportation downtown and limit the use of cars. Secondly, in order to make that patio on the first floor, we had to create a bi-directional ramp on the west side of the building. It's pretty tricky. You really kind of have to know your way around the building to use it pretty often. So just like most central libraries around the country that I know of, there's not a whole heck of a lot of parking. There's a parking next door, and there's a lot of parking. I think you can get that pretty cheaply now. Yeah, for sure.
I work with AARP Foundation Tax Aid.
Oh, great.
And I want to thank you so much for letting us back into the libraries. And I'm at the Southwest Library.
Awesome.
Mondays and Wednesdays, 1 to 5. Except we're all booked through April 18th.
Yeah, it's one of our best partnerships. They're on the second floor as we speak, the AARP's Community Tax Aid Program. It's great.
Good afternoon. Again, thank you so much for all that you did. I remember MLK when it was new, and it was awful then. Well, I wanted to, could you speak a little bit to the DC Historical Conference that's going to be in 2 weeks?
Sure. So the DC History Conference is a conference that has been going on for I don't know how many years. 48? And it's usually, there's a number of organizations, including the Historical Society of DC is one of the lead organizations that puts it together. The DC Public Library is supportive of it, and some other historical repositories around the city. It is taking place this year at the MLK Library next month. I think that's all I can say. I don't know quite. I mean, it's a great conference. I've spoken at it in the past, and for anybody who as I assume most everyone in this room loves to hear about different elements of the city's history, I strongly urge you to get connected to the DC History Conference. Bill, I don't know if you know much about it.
Just thank you for mentioning it. There's a online registration and so forth. But since you recognize me, thank you again for mentioning the Washingtoniana collection.
Great.
It's one of the great resources of the city, the best functioning archive
She's gone.
On the Archives Advisory Group, we hope to emulate.
Great. Sir?
I have a question that has to do with Washingtoniana. I wrote a book that published The Foggy Bottom Gang, and I worked in the Washingtonian for years with the microfilm there. And I was very fortunate that before I was finished, the archives of the Post and the Evening Star were digitized and searchable and things of that. Do you know of any plans to digitize the other defunct papers like the Times Herald and the Daily News? Yeah, Regardies would be, yeah.
No, I don't. We're always interested in doing it. I don't know if it's a capacity issue for us. You know, we just recently, they're not historical, but we've accepted the morgue of the Washington City paper, and we've been making those back issues available online. The Blade, which you all know is the famous gay, I guess weekly or monthly of that we accepted its morgue a few years ago. It's probably just an issue of just timing. We always have, like any good special collection, there's always a massive backlog. But yeah, I'm happy to follow up and give you my card and see if there's anything in the works.
Real trivia, my book is about the exploits of my father and my uncle in prohibition and illegal gambling. But my uncle's name was Emmett Robert Waring.
Yes, just very quickly, when I was working on the Hill, when the Home Rule bill was going through, I got to know Chuck Stone, who was the leading journalist for the Afro-American newspaper. And I asked him one time, I said, well, he came here in the early 50s, I understand. I said, what was Washington like? And he said, well, first of all, you have to realize everything was segregated except the public libraries. Now, I don't know, I've never checked that out. Does anybody know that that was the case, that the public libraries were not?
Well, let's put it this way. They weren't supposed to be segregated. But the people who worked there, they always never failed to let you know that, well, we really don't like you coming in. I still have vivid memories of experiences at the Congress library. You go up and get 2 books, you know you can't read. Why are you taking these books? So, yeah, technically they weren't supposed to be segregated, but in mindset to a lot of the employees, they were.
They were. Interesting, okay.
So the dismal staircases and hallways that we've renovated now, was that part of Mies van der Rohe's vision, or was this kind of when it was actually constructed, it kind of cheaply ended up this way, or?
That's a great question that hasn't been explored enough. So it was one of his very last buildings. He died while it was still in design. He also designed it to specifications based on codes that were in place in Illinois, where he lived at the time. So there were changes to the MLK library made during construction. He was dead because they weren't DC code. There was also just a tremendous amount of value engineering done. So a lot of that buff yellow brick was supposed to be the nice dark green marble that you see in places like the Seagram building. So it's probably not the building that he would have, had he lived, my guess is that he would have fought the ultimate building that was built. There were flaws with the building that he has to take responsibility for, but he did say that the building could be changed. So I mean, I ultimately think he would be very happy with how it turned out. But there's also a backstory about how he was given the commission in the first place. Nobody knew Mies van der Rohe. I mean, certainly the residents of the district didn't know or want Mies van der Rohe. So he was appointed. There were no DC. This was a NCPC, the National Capital Planning Commission. Said, we're just going to use Mies van der Rohe for this. And he probably said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And I don't know how much time he put into it. I like to think that he loved working on the project, but I don't know if that's the case.
We would like now to give Cindy and our virtual audience a chance to ask some of the questions. So if we can, Cindy and our members, virtual members today.
I will ask anybody who has a question to go ahead and put them in chat, but the majority, we haven't had any questions yet, just much appreciation for your presentation and how much everybody enjoyed it. So thank you. If I have any in the chat, I'll let you know.
We do have 23 members who are joining us online today, which may be a record. We're certainly happy to have them. We're even happier to have them here, but your presence is noted and welcome. That I have not taken any.
Could I make a comment? Yes, this is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. The sight lines, the natural light, the lighting fixtures. I happened to be at MLK the day it was closing and happened to meet the lead architect from Meccano. She actually said she moved here for 6 months and she rode her bicycle around here just to get the sight lines from what I guess she had already envisioned as a green roof. But I am blessed to be, I live 6 doors from the Cleveland Park Library. And again, the natural light in the stairwells and the sight lines. I happen to be on the committee for the Cleveland Park, and I never appreciated, this is a community space, and the sight lines are so important. Absolutely nailed it on all of these places. In Cleveland Park, as you walk up Newark Street, you see the children's area. You look into the children's area, and the book stacks are perpendicular, and there's the kids' bathroom, and there's a red door. So as you walk up there, you can see anything that goes on there. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for what you've done, and Meccano was brilliant. But the thing that comes to mind is I would like some Congress people to come down there and have some sort of event up on the top, on the green roof. And yeah, we're not some backwater plantation. We have built the extraordinary libraries, extraordinary, and I think they should see it before they even consider taking away our home rule and everything else they're going to take away. Is that a possibility, getting some of those characters up there to come
Well,
down
we've
and
had a
see
lot
this?
of VIPs there. We were actually, Senator Bernie Sanders was supposed to take a tour a couple of months ago, but it was right around the holidays and then something happened, I don't know. But no, we get a lot of people coming in,
Well,
and we will get more.
okay, not exactly Bernie, but some other people down
Well.
there who never leave the Capitol Hill.
Right.
Maybe we can get them down there with some drinks or, some free food or something. Thank you.
Bad news. Well, again, thanks to Rich for joining us today. Don't go away. We have for you the coveted certificate of appreciation to add to the many on your wall, presented to Richard Reyes-Gavilan. Misspelled your second name. Do we have a good scriptologist here? For his presentation pertaining to the DC Public Libraries on behalf of the AOI of DC, March 17th, 2022. And wait, there's more.
Money, all right.
Well, it's money in a sense. It's the coin of the realm in this organization. These are our challenge coins, and you probably have dozens of them.
I don't, actually.
Good.
Yeah.
They're far too widely distributed among the executive branches, particularly the military. So, you can say, this is my challenge coin. Next time somebody from the Army Corps of Engineers comes by and wants to check the building. But
Oh, wow, look at that.
yeah, it is. It's
Thanks
a
so
rather
much. That's
handsome
beautiful.
piece.
Thanks.
So, Rich, thank you for coming
All right.
today. Keep up the great work.
All right.
And friends here and with us virtually, I think we're going to close this meeting today. And now, refresh my memory. What's up next? Program committee people? Our next meeting is, drum roll, April 21st, and our presenters will be?
That much I don't know.
It's on the website. It is on the website. I'm sorry, I'm juggling a bunch of things in the air. So until that time, stay healthy, stay happy. I just also wanted to mention, keep an eye out. I noticed just the other day that yet another plan for the reutilization or re-envisioning of Pennsylvania Avenue has begun to make its way through to the surface. So keep an eye out for that. And you know, if you have advocacy issues, always you're welcome to bring them to the attention of the board. And Carolyn, would you like to say something?
Yes, I found it. The April 21st meeting is, the speaker is the MPDC Deputy Chief Retired Patrick Burke, President of the DC Police Foundation.
Great, and we'll be happy to see Mr. Burke, Officer Burke, Captain Burke probably then. And until that time, have a wonderful rest of the month, and may spring be blooming and happy, and we all do well. Thank you.